Okay, well, hey there, Kate. I'm so thankful to have you here on the Confident Sober Women podcast. And I'm going to share, I'm going to I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on, Shelby. It's lovely to meet you. Um, yeah, so where to begin? It's funny. Concentrated a lot in my work, I guess, in my work in recovery, on the very much the alcohol-free piece. The alcohol-free choice has been a huge sort of changing narrative in the UK over the last few years. So I suppose I first started my sober journey in about 11 years ago, and I'm in my 8th year of continuous sobriety. Um, yeah, it's been a very interesting time. So, we always say, don't we? It's kind of the recovery is a bit like peeling the layers of the onion. And I feel like this part that we're going to chat about today, that you've, generously offered, to have me on today, and delve into this, is the kind of the spirituality side of recovery. Um, and it is a big piece for me. I have to say it really, really is. And maybe if I spend a little bit of time sort of shedding light on my early bit of kind of formative religious experience, because I feel like that had a really key role in my drinking as well.
Absolutely.
So, um, yeah, so I guess I think I would say religion was my first drug,
Hmm.
right? When I was about 13. And I do very much separate out spirituality and religion for all the reasons, spirituality, spiritual practice, spiritual identity. It really isn't anything to do with religion. It can be, you can be in a religious framework, but I feel that's a really important distinction to make. And I'm obviously not the first one to say that. And it's very personal. So you'll often hear people say, oh, I'm very spiritual. I'm not religious, I'm very spiritual. So we obviously know that. We obviously know that in that kind of cultural narrative. We're used to that.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say that's entirely right for me as well. But my first sort of brush with it, I guess, as a kind of regulatory tool, or something to kind of soothe, something to cope with, which is then what I used alcohol for, was in the form of religion when I was a teenager. And my family weren't religious. My aunt was, and I adored her. And I moved in with my stepfather, and my mum married again, and we lived opposite a church. So it seemed like there was a lot of it about, and so I started going, and quite soon there's a lot of things I really enjoyed about it. Like, I really enjoyed the routine, I enjoyed the community, I enjoyed singing, I love singing, but it somehow got tied up with possibly, now I know that I'm neurodivergent as well. So I have ADHD and lots of autistic traits. So this need for routine regularity, and with what I was coping with, it became very obsessive. So before long, it was like other people could kind of go a bit like alcohol, go and have a little bit and then leave it. It was like literally all or nothing for me. So before long, even when I was really young, I was praying 2 hours a day. I was meditating on the Bible. This is like 13, 14-year-old kid coming home from school and reading the Bible for 2 hours and praying, um, in order for it to be good enough. And I was going through my day, and I know I've got that lens looking back on it. Oh, I was trying to cope. I was obviously trying to not make mistakes. It was a kind of trauma response. So I was trying to be very, very perfect. So that's how I got to the point where I was doing things like I was counting my sins throughout the day. And then I would have to attach that to a lot of prayer, to atone, and it just took a really dark turn for me. Very anxious, just it became a very, very unhealthy coping mechanism. So sort of fast forward, that was all through till I was about 16. Um, when I went to sixth form college, I studied English literature, and I met people probably for the first time who I could properly relate to, and who, yeah, I think that I could connect with. So there was the connection piece kind of thing. And at this point, it was the late 80s, or sort of mid 80s. And there was a big kind of, I don't know if it was the same in the States, but there was a lot of goths and this kind of Kate Bush, the Gothic movement. So there was a lot of paganism and Wicca and that kind of thing.
Mm.
So I got really into that. I decided absolutely, that it was too painful, going to church and this, that it was almost like I just had to switch it off completely. So I had this kind of, I suppose, a kind of rupture there. Um, and I started reading about comparative religion. I did my dissertation at university on the goddess religion, and neo-paganism and feminism in the United States. I studied systems of ritual life. I was like full on really, really into it. Um, and then I just think I hit my 20s and I just substituted it for alcohol. I just shut off from everything. I went and I taught for a bit. I moved to London. I got a career as a journalist and entered the alcohol. And then that was it. It was like, well, I don't need to be, I don't know, going to this place in my head. It was like I could just numb it out, you know. It was sort of, so alcohol kind of took the place of that for a few years, as did sort of, I suppose, moving from an inner gaze to a very outward gaze and shutting off the inner gaze completely. Because if I went to the inner gaze, it would just lead me back to all this kind of perfectionism and, all of this God stuff that I just couldn't reconcile with myself, and I was like, don't be ridiculous, like I'm crazy. So, yeah, so that, obviously, um, fast forward again, motherhood, careers, lots of traveling, everything looking fine to the outside world. But what was really going on with both the kind of the drinking side of things and this kind of spiritual connection was that I think for so many of us that have, that are in recovery will relate to that, the inner and outer mismatch. This kind of, often we look like we're doing fine on the surface, but actually inside we just feel like a shell and we don't know who on earth we are, kind of thing. So I always say then that finally, there was this kind of movement in the UK where I found a website Googling, am I an alcoholic at 3 o'clock in the morning in my early 40s? I'm now in my 50s. And I found something I could relate to, which was this first thing in the UK, which was Soberista's website. It was a blogging website. It's before the social media. Social media hadn't happened. No one was out. It was all behind closed doors. And so I started blogging, making friends, and quit drinking. So I did that kind of muscle power for the first year, then went back to drinking. Then I really started in earnest to discover self-care. And this I think was the first bit of me getting back to spiritual connection, was actually through self-compassion with Tara Brach. So I listened to this, my last day one, Touching All the Wood. I listened to Tara Brach, Reign of Self-Compassion. Someone had recommended it to me. And I just felt like there was a connection that was made. It was like I just went, oh, 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 here I am. Literally, like for the first time, I could listen in, I could have a conversation, and I was able to witness my own pain in that moment. And the last bit of it was that I was able to say, okay, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be with you. And I remember getting so excited. I was like, oh my fucking God, excuse my French. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. I was like, this is it. It doesn't matter the labels. It doesn't matter the head stuff. It was just like, I know that if I drink, I abandon myself, and I'm not going to do that anymore. Never, never, ever. I will never leave her again. Never. with whatever tool it is, I won't leave her again. And I ran through to my husband and I went, I know why I don't drink. I know why it is. And I explained it to him and he just said, that makes total sense to me. I was like, thank you. Thank you. So that began this kind of process of delving into self-care. It was like, right, I'm going to go hard on this again. I'm going to go hard on this because I'm not going to go soft on anything. So how do I do self-care? Okay. Oh, okay. I've got sober treats. Okay. I go, oh, what do you need? That's another thing. When I realized it was like it changed all the time. And then I was like, okay, I can't do self-care once. I have to check in every day. So this started this almost practice. It started a practice of leaning in regularly to inquire what it is that I needed, what it is that I wanted. And you can fast forward the layers of the onion, and I think the next significant shift really, I trained as a coach, so I was putting together all the kind of coaching tools. I studied the science of happiness, so I was getting together these kind of mental tools. I was developing a yoga practice at that time, so there was a lot of somatic stuff. And then it was like, okay, I feel better. There's something about me that feels better. And this led to me, it kind of almost all converging to a sort of creative, seasonal, what I came to understand was a spiritual practice. So I came almost back full circle in my menopause. And it was like a second teenage years. It was like this kind of, I'm not going to go outwards, I'm going to go inwards. The gaze had fully shifted to the inner world again and how I was relating to the deeper questions in life. And maybe I'll take a pause then. It feels like there might be a pause.
Sure, yeah, you've shared so much, and I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability with all of this. Sometimes it can be really vulnerable and kind of raw to share these parts of ourselves. But as we know, you and I both, for being around the recovery community for so long, that's how it works, right? That's how we stay well. That's how we show other women how we stayed well and encourage people to do the same. So I appreciate your perspective. This is such an interesting and unique conversation and something we really haven't um, heard on the podcast in this way. We've talked about spirituality before, but I really think your story is so interesting, just the way it all played out for you. And it makes me think about a lot of people who struggle with what I call spiritual trauma. And
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of that I've encountered it I'm a therapist in my private practice. I've seen a lot of women who have struggled with that in a variety of ways from their growing up years. But in your case, it wasn't even really like you grew up in that. I mean, you have an aunt but you kind of brought it on yourself and just latched on to that. Like you mentioned, like that became your drug.
Yeah.
Um, which is, I think, pretty unique. What do you think? I don't know if this is, feel free to not answer if you don't want to, but if you can think back around that time, like around 13 or, um, ish, like when that was all kind of coming out, what were you searching for, do you think?
Mm. I think I was searching for, well, it's very interesting because my daughter is now 13. And through my kids both being diagnosed with as neurodivergent, I then went down that route and I have my own diagnosis. And actually, what I think it was a being partly neurodivergent in a neurotypical world, and life being pretty traumatic, going to a secondary school in the UK in the 1980s was not a nurturing, safe experience. So I think that was part of it. I think there's probably a good dose of hormones going on, which makes you just feel super uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Right. That makes sense.
And yeah, and then there was the family piece. There was definitely, my mum, got married again, and it wasn't a happy family environment. So there were all these, it was just a teenager trying to cope, and I feel almost like it is, and there would be a trigger warning here around self-harm, because I think it was self-harming what I actually ended up doing with it, counting my sins and denying myself things that I wanted in this attempt to control
Right.
and regulate. So
Right. I
regulate,
mean,
regulate.
it sounds
Yeah.
very, yeah, somewhat dysfunctional, but very, very much about control, similar to like the eating disorders or addictions.
Yes.
They're all in the
Yeah.
same family. And also, I mean, what it really sounds to me like this, I mean, and this is something that religion in the traditional sense, meaning like church and such, as well as even like recovery programs and things, can provide a sense of belonging. Like
Yeah.
if you were a girl who was just didn't really feel like you knew where you fit in, like because of the neurodivergent qualities that you had, or just your family life, then finding a community that's like, yes, come here, we love
Yeah.
you, you're welcome. Like who doesn't want that? I mean, that feels
Yeah.
good, you know? And but then for you, it just took a little bit of a different turn, starting to do those other kind of obsessive compulsive types of
Exactly.
behaviors. Um, but then
Yeah.
it's interesting that you, so you're doing all that, and then in this seemingly like, and this is where it gets to be a struggle too. And I'm so thankful that you started off the conversation noting the difference between spirituality and religion, because they are very different. And I think it's important for all of us. I talk about this a lot when I share about it. And you know what? Also, like religion, like we're Christian people. We go to church. My children went to Christian schools. We really value that in our life. We love it, and we go to a place that makes us feel good about it. It fills us up, right? And
Yeah.
so, and that's just how we choose to do it. But in my own life, I have become a much more spiritual person, very in touch with the relationship I have with my higher power, and with things
Yeah.
like, nature and the earth, and spirit in general. And so
Yeah.
those things can be mutually beneficial. They can live together,
They
cohabitate,
can.
right? But they could also fight against one another. And I
Mm.
generally think that a lot of times that comes from spiritual trauma, whether it's from your family of origin, or like you were part of a community or a church that just did, not so nice things, or
Yeah.
treated you poorly.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of those, unfortunately. People do some strange things in the name of God, and it's a very unfortunate situation. So,
Yeah. And I also think that sometimes people didn't, because with this kind of thing, it was very private to me. And so there wasn't that much guidance as well. I think kids weren't, especially weren't listened to in those days as well. So I remember when I went through the confirmation process, the vicar said to me, he gave me this, and this was part of a lovely church. So then I went to this born again evangelical one, and that was scary. That was scary. There was stuff going on there that I think that I had definitely had some trauma from. Um, but go back to the nice vicar, he was really surprised that I was reading the books that I was, because he was like, these are heavy theological texts that a 13-year-old cannot possibly have the brain context. And I didn't. I was misusing them. So that was quite interesting. So I do think you're right. And I love what you said about, and this is what I was going to talk about kind of next, I think, is this idea of relationship, which I feel like, so now I've actually got a really lovely quote which summed this up for me. Things keep dropping into my inbox at the moment. His spirituality is not separate. No, that's my quote. It's James Finley. A spiritual practice is any act habitually entered into with your whole heart as a way to awaken, deepen a contemplative experience. Can't read my own writing. Used to explore the holiness of the present moment.
mhm.
Like, and that really sums it up for me. And so what's happened, okay, I feel like I have a joined up practice. I've written a book, Love Your Sober Year, which is about the kind of exploration back to seasonal living, nature, which was such a so key for me when I was a kid, and able to dive back into it with now this kind of groundedness that has come from working on that trauma. Okay. And I think the way that I've worked on that trauma is a somatic practice through yoga, which is also very mindful and spiritual and nurturing.
Yes.
A creative practice, but also walking in nature. So about a year ago, I accidentally inherited a dog that needed a lot of walking. So I had a little dog, and I live in beautiful woods. So I'd written Love Your Sober. I knew about it. I was working with it, um, with this kind of much more embodied practice and being, aware of the seasons and knowing that I was experiencing seasonal shifts. I was working somatically, as I said. So I feel like this part, I think I might jump in here because part of this is to highlight for me what I think is really important as well, is that I don't separate body and spirit, the body, mind, spirit. It's all connected for me. Now, the reason I say that is because of, studying polyvagal theory. And we know that when we're in fight flight, we're in our survival mode. Now, for me, I can't access those transcendental emotions of awe, of connectedness, of love, unless I am regulated with my if I have a nourished nervous system, which is what I was trying to do when I was a kid, nourish my nervous system. And I used to say, when I felt the tingle at the back of my neck, however long that took, I used to call that the Holy Spirit. I now call that my ventral vagal nervous system coming online, which I get in the woods. And I get as a sense of being part of nature and this beautiful connection. I have it when I'm vibing with other people, I get the same thing. So actually, it was about dropping in, soothing, and feeling connected with everything and other people. Anyway, back to the dog. What happened is, because this dog as well is a bit of a live wire, I have a local nature reserve where I can only, like, I basically take him every day. So rather than going all over the south of England, I live in a beautiful part of the country, I'm having to tramp these same fields, these same woods, these same meadows, these same streams every single day. Now, every single day I see something different. I see a change. I see things that I would never see. And it has been like the most beautiful gift. So I will start with a feeling and I'll tramp and I'll listen to music and I'll be talking to the whatever. I'll be crying if I need to cry and I'll be tramping along the woods. And this has become like the recovery practice, the spiritual practice, the emotional practice, honestly. And this is what, James Fallon Finley is saying. It's like this regular practice that you inhabit in order to contemplate and be mindful and realizing the present moment. So that for me is literally like walking in the woods. So these things just can show up in our lives, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that part. And I love what you're saying. I love this spiritual practice that you have kind of happened into, right? The dog kind
Yeah,
of came to you.
it did.
And I don't really think anything is happenstance in my view, right? I believe that there are great plans for us, for all of us. And so the great plan for you is to have this dog come into your life so that you could then create a opportunity to build a more mindful, connected spiritual program for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what that is, right? And so yeah, I mean, I think spirituality and even connection with a higher power or universe or whatever you want to call it, when you're doing things like that, is when that is how we self-soothe,
Yeah.
if we, like you mentioned, if our nervous systems are all a mess, right? If we're living in high cortisol levels, if we're like drenched in cortisol all the time, we're vibrating at a super high level but not in a good way, then we can't really even hear, we can't tune in to the still small voice,
Yeah.
right? We can't hear the the messages that are constantly coming to us. We can't even see those things that you notice in nature. We'd just be out there, be like, come on, dog, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go, like, get to the bathroom, like, get your exercise. We wouldn't even be able to notice, the changing of the leaves or the growing of the moss or whatever you're seeing out there. And we miss it. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
We miss it.
Yeah.
And but what you're saying is when we can learn, and when when we're active addiction, we certainly, at least in my experience, and most people I know, are not able to do that, right? Because even
Yeah.
when you're not actively drinking in that moment, you're still in active addiction, and so your
Yeah.
body is just kind of inflamed. Your mind is not peaceful.
Yeah.
You generally have a lot of negative self-talk, these kinds of things, and so when you finally do find what works for you and begin to recover, especially after that first year or so of sobriety, when
Yeah.
you stay sober for about a year or so, you wake up to these possibilities, right? You wake up to the idea and even the concept of having a spiritual program, because
Yeah.
sometimes we might be like, forget it, I'm not doing that, or I can't meditate, I can't sit still, and we chalk things up to like, you literally can't do it. Like, I
Mm.
used to say things like, I can't take the yoga because I can't sit in the room for 50 minutes. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And but like, I could do it, in that state I really wasn't capable, because my mind wasn't able to just slow down and not be
Yeah.
constantly looking for the clock, or wondering when it's over, or getting up and leaving. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
but when we
Totally.
stay sober for a while and we start to step into that more long-term recovery program for ourselves personally, it looks so much different.
Yeah.
And we get these skills. We get to be emotionally sober, which is
Mm.
completely dependent on our work,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's yeah, I love what you said about that. And I definitely had that experience with yoga as well. And I think learning about the nervous system, honestly, I this is why I say there's no separation for me. The kind of the nervous system, the understanding the science, the experience in the body, and then the creative expression, which I believe that, we all, just by the very nature that we are alive and breathing, we're part of this expanding cosmic thing. We just are. That's just kind of, we are. You can't argue with it, can you? Because there isn't sort of, we are here. And this personal expression, um, it's just so beautiful. It's our opportunity to show up in the world and have our, be in communion with it and show up. Um, and so for me, all of it goes together. All of that goes together. Um, and I really feel like it's happened. I've seen it a lot in the sober community when people, like you said, you get this kind of emotional sobriety element. But it's expanding, isn't it? It feels like it's this huge, expansive, beautiful thing that we get to engage with. Like, and that for me feels very spiritual. Like, I feel grateful for that. That's like, whoa,
I love
how
that you
did we
said we
get
get to.
how did we get so lucky?
I know, and you're right. We do use the best words, we get to. We don't have to do this. No one's telling
Yeah.
us we have to. I mean, most of the time we're better when we do, but we get to be a part of this life.
Mhm.
We get to be a part of this life, and we get to find what feels good to us to grow.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but most of the time it is simple, right? And
Mm.
these practices and these tools that we put into place they're not usually very complex. It's just
Yeah.
it is a matter of sort of discipline, though, right? and
Hmm.
and being willing to want something more than you don't want it. It's kind of like when
Yeah.
you're figuring out if you're going to stop drinking. Do you want to be sober more than you want to be drunk? You and I both decided yes, we did, so that's now here we are.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could talk a little bit. I really want to dive into a little bit about how this has linked to your menopause as a woman who is, in my late 40s, about to be I'll be 50 next year. Definitely perimenopausal, experiencing some of the changes that come along with that. Definitely at the cusp. What
Mm,
what has that experience been like for you? Because you've linked it into your work, so I'm really
yeah.
curious if you can say more about that.
Yeah. So I think, I have linked it into my work, and part of that is from values, my values work, which is, I am about female empowerment, and part of my own recovery, my own journey, um, is about that, is about women having a voice, and women, like, I felt very, very strongly that alcohol in the UK was peddled at women as false self-care, and we were basically being told to shut up with it. So that informed my work. My first book was very much about what I, calling bullshit on alcohol normative cultures. That was a motherhood piece. And then as my kids got older and I went into the perimenopause and menopause, what I was finding was that, well, when I went back to drinking, so I don't call it relapse, I call it more of a reoccurrence, but it's just a semantic thing. Interestingly, that was when I was 43, so I'd be bang on hitting start of the perimenopause. And I started seeing people, women who had been sober for, 3, 4 years, suddenly hitting rocky patches and getting derailed. So I knew that there must be a kind of a foundational health piece that was dysregulating women. Also, the chronic caring load, often still having young kids, having the parents get a bit older, um, and then this kind of hormonal dysregulation. So I studied it. I studied with the menopause school. Um, so I always say there's two sides of it. There's almost two camps. There's this kind of, almost like hot sobriety movement in the UK where we're like Davina McCall all shouting about the menopause, right? There's also this kind of psycho-spiritual angle to it, which is going through the female rites of passage, which of course appealed to me because it was like, okay, triple goddess, mother, maiden, crone. This is a real, a rite of passage that we're going through. And if we're seeing mental health crises peak through menopause with women, of course, with women. Why? So you'll be seeing alcohol use peak at this point. So what is the need not being met? So this is what I ask all the time. What is the need not being met? Right. So, well, the way I work with clients is very much this holistic. We use alcohol-free as the foundation. You've got to get rid of that. And then it's this holistic piece where most of the clients I work with are in the midlife. So we will have to have that conversation. And part of that is this menopause doula stuff that I trained in. So that can be like, it's symptom led, and it's how to advocate for your needs with your healthcare practitioner and try and drag them up to, speed. But part of it is that we are naturally, and we should be in the midlife going, what's next? Like, how do I want my next bit to look like? And that's not going to look like our 30s. It's not going to look like our teenage years. And there is a deepening question for many women and an introspection, because we are thinking about the bigger picture, right? We're thinking about aging. We're thinking about our parents. They're probably, dying. So the mortality piece is coming. And with those, if we haven't done the emotional sobriety work as well, they're going to be big things coming up for us. So we might need to have some support around that. So there's a brilliant program in the UK if you're into that. It's not sobriety focused, but it is around, it's Dr. Sharon Blackie, and she's got a program called Haggitude, which is, it goes through this kind of idea of this celebrating going into that kind of wild woman, wise woman, crone period of our lives.
Mm.
So that's really great. So there's some things being started to be talked about, but that's why I kind of, essentially why I was interested, because it made sense from the sort of human animal seasonal. It's the season of our life. and people were relapsing all over the place, and there was a need. So
it's interesting that you were able to see that connection between alcohol use and this time of
yeah,
period menopause time. And it sounds like what in your discovery, and it makes perfect sense, is that when we aren't capable, or when we're not making a priority of self-soothing, self-care, things like that, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then those the burden
yeah,
of peri and menopause time feels a lot heavier.
yeah.
And so then we want to use something to quickly take that
Mm.
away, something like alcohol. Does that make
Yeah, and
sense?
it might have worked. I see lots of women sort of, it almost forces the moment to a crisis,
Mm,
because what alcohol then does, the liver is trying to metabolize whatever estrogen, because the estrogen is dipping towards menopause, and it's going up and down, up and down, up and down in perimenopause. And the liver's job is to try and metabolize whatever estrogen there is to support brain function, cardiovascular system, like all of the 11 systems of the body. And basically, if we're drinking, the liver then it has to prioritize keeping us alive by removing
right.
the grade one carcinogen that is alcohol. Um, so it can't metabolize estrogen. So we're going to feel even worse, even
Right.
worse. So, it could be that you could have almost limped along coping with it, but you just can't. So women in the midlife are just going, oh, actually, this really isn't working.
So it sounds like us as sober women already have an edge when it
We
comes to this stage of life.
100%.
Like
We so
we're
have
already
an
winning.
edge. Yeah, yeah, it's so
We
true.
win.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And
that's so good.
also, but that with that, this is why, again, with the holistic sobriety, the it's really important for me that women are supported, because again, if you might be sober, but you might have had some, hardcore corporate job and be running on cortisol, and that is going to be so, and then suddenly you hit your 40s and you're struggling with that, then there's all the kind of narrative that can go with that, this kind of what's wrong with me, and from an ED&I, equality, diversity, inclusion point of view in the workplace. We're starting to shift in the UK around rights for menopausal women, but there's a big sort of political, social piece that needs to be done to stop women having to burn out at this period, you know? So there's, it is a holistic, it is a spiritual, it's a therapeutic standpoint that I've got, but I'm also making a political standpoint about it, because again, it's not a level playing field then for women, is it? So
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I mean, what it really sounds like, I mean, what your dream and hope and help for women is to know that they can be supported. There is a way for them to feel that way. And even if they have a provider, and we see this a lot, right, on social media and things, women's
yeah,
experiences that are not very positive, right, with providers. And so if they feel that they are not being listened to or heard, it's okay to go somewhere else. It's
yeah,
okay to, I mean, you can try to speak up with that person and say, you're not listening to me, or do what you can, but it might be best to go elsewhere, and letting women know
yeah.
that that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also to work with what's possible, in terms of what's, advocating for our needs with partners, with lowering our workload if we possibly can, if we being able to say to a partner, look, I know mainly this is coming from a point of privilege. Okay, I can't do this and this and this, so I need someone to do the ironing, or
Right.
this needs to happen. So it's like I shouldn't have to carry all of this, so it's
Right.
advocating for our
Exactly.
needs, right?
And sometimes it's I don't necessarily think it's, I mean, some things might sound like they're coming from a place of privilege, maybe, but a lot of it just comes to, some of it comes down to priorities too. Like,
Mm.
we might need to scale back to just the basics, and if there's a stage in life where we're like, we are feeling very overwhelmed, or we have a greater load of caregiver, like like you mentioned, with parents and things.
Yeah,
And I have young adult children, and sometimes they're just as needy or worse than young children.
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling overwhelmed or burdened, like you might have to say no to a lot of other commitments, or you might have to bring your workload down to the minimum, right? You may not be
Yes.
able to go above and beyond like you
Yeah.
did, when you were 30. And you might be able to go back to some of that at another time as things
Yeah.
settle in. But a lot of us, we view that as like weakness, or
Mm.
I'm not capable or something like that, when really it's just, honestly, we all have a limit, you know?
Yeah.
We only have
Yes.
so much energy to use each day. And yes, sometimes we need to push ourselves through things, of course. Like we're like,
Mm.
oh, I'm tired, or we have to push ourselves. But if it's a consistent battle, or you're consistently not feeling well, or you just can't get things regulated, it's really, we have to look at that stuff. We have to look
Yeah.
at, where can I get some help, or where can
Yeah.
I cut back on things?
Yeah. 100%, 100%. And I think one thing that can really help again is that kind of, for me, is if you look at things seasonally, we have built into the seasons, we're not supposed to be productive 24/7
Right.
all the time. So, spring, we have that kind of
Hmm.
shoots coming through, summer plateaus, then the fall or autumn where things shed, and then we go to winter, which is rest and contemplation, integration.
Hmm.
And if we're using the models of nature, we also know there's a sort of, this goes back to spirituality as well, I guess. There's a trust in that. There's a process to it, and it's bigger than us. And sometimes I feel like that can just take the load off sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't have to be, it's not all on us. It's not, it can't all be on us, and the timing of our lives isn't all on us.
You're right. Oh my gosh, Kate. Well, we have really covered a lot in this conversation, and I know my community is going to love hearing from you, and just the different perspective that we've been able to share, and the light we've been shining on just the needs of women, and how we can nurture that. I love it. Thank you so much. Where do you like people to reach out to you, if they want to get a hold of you?
The best place is just the website lovesober.com, and that signposts everything that I do. I do a Substack newsletter, send out a resource every week, but you can find that on there. Yes, everything I do, lovesober.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure it's linked below. And thank you again so much for your time. And I look forward to